to you all. My name is Andrew Chung. I'm artistic producer of London Symphonia, and welcome to this edition of Behind the Music. And Behind the Music gives us a chance to speak to our guest artists and our special guests involved with our upcoming concerts. And on this occasion, I have the great pleasure of welcoming John Rice. Hello, John.
Hello, Andrew.
And John is an elder from the Wasauksing First Nation near Parry Sound. And I'm also welcoming Richard Mascall. Hello, Richard.
Hi there. How's it going?
Very, very well. Thanks, guys, for joining me so that people can learn a little bit more about Zigwan, this brand new composition. And this is ahead of our concert, The Rite of Spring, on April the 9th. So I'm just going to embarrass you both a little bit, read a little bit of your bio. So first with John. John is a member of Wasauksing First Nation community. He is a second-degree member of the Three Fires Midwewin Society. Since 1978, John has had an active role in his community's social development, serving as band planner, director of education, and chief. He is currently an assist suicide intervention trainer, and he helped develop and facilitate a training program in Simcoe County called Feather Carriers, Leadership for Life. In 2016, he was honored as the recipient of the CAMH, I hope I got this right, Chapin Asin Elder Vern Harper Award for Excellence in the provision of culturally based practice. John has dedicated his life to learning the Mikan's teaching, which speaks about the spirit journey from the creator through life and back to the creator. Richard is a composer trained at the Royal Conservatory of Music and University of Toronto's Faculty of Music, where he studied with Pierre Galland, Walter Buczynski, Glenn Buhr, and Christos Hatsis. Richard's award-winning work, Labyrinth, was chosen to represent Canada at the 1993 International Rostrum of Composers in Paris, France. From 2006 to 2010, he served as composer in residence for the Georgian Bay Symphony. His music has been widely performed across Canada by many leading orchestras and ensembles. And there have been recent performances in the United States, England, Italy, Estonia, Finland, and South Korea. For over 15 years now, Richard has taken a great interest in Aboriginal art and culture, and to this point has written over a dozen native-themed works. Richard's worked closely with Indigenous communities, and in 2012 was honored with the spirit name Singing Beaver on Water by Anishinaabe elder Thunder Timberwolf. Richard's Ojibwe songs were presented at a special gala concert at the Royal Naval College Chapel in Greenwich, London, England in 2016. His musical tale of Nanabush and the Giant Beaver has become a staple in the programming of classical music for children. So guys, this goes back a long way. When we started talking about this, I'd spoken to our composer in residence, Scott Good, and asked him, we would like to present a new work of music involving Indigenous themes, and what did he suggest? And he connected me with you, Richard. And I think that if I remember right, at our first conversation, even, you were very excited, very animated, and you came up with this idea of sort of a part theater, part music, and immediately you thought of John Rice. So, for this new piece, Ziigwan. And little did I know at that time that your association with John Rice went back to 2010. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, I first met Son Ray, John Rice, in 2010 at the Festival of the Sound in Parry Sound, where the piece Nanabush and the Giant Beaver was in a way coming home, because this is the story of the formation of the 30,000 islands. And so I presented the piece to Jim Campbell, and he recognized the significance. And so he programmed it, and he was the one who got this fellow, John Rice, to be the narrator. And that's how we met. So it was kind of like one of those things where the universe just puts things together, and you just kind of flow with the current of the river, and it all just unfolds for you. So that was really positive. We had a great performance that day, which I got to conduct, and we kind of made a very positive connection. And then 7 years later, when it was the sesquicentennial Canada 150 celebrations, we did it again. And after that, we consolidated this connection we had. And that led to another collaboration involving one of our mutual friends, Ben Bolt Martin. And so it was during the time that we were working on that project that Ben and John and I had a meeting, and this was when the first notions of our collaboration for London Symphonia came up. And at that time, we were just kind of sort of searching for ideas. And so when we had this meeting, I said to John at the time, after our meeting with Ben was concluded, I said, do you mind if I stick around and ask you a few questions? And then I basically just threw a couple of questions out to him about the subject of spring from the First Nations point of view. And I wish I'd had a recorder with me that day, because everything he said was dynamite. And when I heard this, I thought to myself, wow, okay, this is what we're going to do. And I didn't need to search for anything. What I was going to do was work with John, and we would create something together. And so this has ultimately led to the current project, where we've actually, as it turned out, it's been done entirely over Zoom and on phone calls, because it's been done during the pandemic. And basically, it's led to a very interesting artistic collaboration where John, I'd kind of interview him, and then he supplies me with all of these ideas and this content. And then after that, I would take these recordings that I made of our conversations, and I would kind of rig up a kind of a treatment of it, and then I would present it to him, and then we back and forth would work on it and edit it to refine it to the point where we had the script that we've used to for the basis of these pieces.
Now, going back to 2010, so John, do you remember being approached by the first time? Was this by Richard to be involved in being a narrator for the first time?
No, actually, my niece worked at the Stocky Center in Prairie Sound, and she, in the late fall, early winter of 2009, she talked about the upcoming season. They're looking for a narrator to participate in the Nana Bush and the Giant Beaver. So she asked me if I'd be interested.
Oh.
And I like doing things, just trying things out. I'd never done anything like that before. So I said, yeah, I'd like to. I am a storyteller. I tell stories in circles, and that way I tell stories to people. So I thought I would try this out. I had
Yeah.
no idea what it was like, eh? But anyway, so I tried that out, and Richard and I met later that year before the performance and in rehearsal, and we came really good. One of the things to remember, this is kind of like, two people, like a convergence, eh? I remember when in my group on the reserve, we didn't even have our own traditional music at that time, because of the way Canada regarded us, saying we couldn't practice our culture, we couldn't do those things. So in about 1985, some of us young men, we started big drumming in my community. So in my community, that was the first time we openly started practicing something cultural. And some of our older people were a little bit, had a little bit of fear for us, because of the way Canada had been about
So
us.
in a way, was that in defiance of what was, allowed or permitted at the time, or was it an emergence and a?
A bit of both. Of course, being young and defiant, it was in defiance, but it also was an emergence of returning to our culture was a way to health and well-being. because our culture talks about holistic well-being, eh? So the practices of living better lives came from that, starting big drumming again.
And did,
But
oh, go ahead. Yeah.
but even before that, like I said, I didn't have any. I went to powwows and stuff before, but within my own community, we didn't practice like music and art until the early '80s to mid '80s. We had a revival. But my experience was in grade nine. I joined when I went to Perry Sound High School. I joined the high school concert band. That was yeah, that was my introduction to classical music.
What
The
was your
culmination.
instrument, John?
Mhm.
What was your instrument in the band?
Oh, I started off. No, I actually had a trombone, and because I had such a big lungs, I guess they bought a bass trombone for me to use. And
Oh,
our signature
Bass
piece
trombone.
became
Wow.
Mars, eh? Gustav Holst Mars, where it has a heavy,
yeah.
the raspy sound of the trombone in that piece, eh?
Totally.
But that the culmination of my high school concert band was actually we went to England in grade 13, and our concert band toured England, and ironically enough, I went to a concert at the Royal Albert Hall to listen to 1812 Overture, not knowing that maybe 2 miles from that spot, Richard was 2 years old.
Oh,
Yes.
that's right. You grew up in England. Ah.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so we talk about that convergence, how this all came together in 2010. Eh? But since I left high school, I wasn't involved in classical music.
Mhm.
But I've always had a thought, that that's an awesome thing that our young people need to be involved with. So when I met Richard and we did Nanabush and the Giant Beaver, I was inspired again
Mhm.
to encourage our youth to become involved with classical music and not be shy about, we have our culture, but we can do both.
Right. Well,
So
that's quite interesting. So, for Nanabush, did you provided the storyline for that, the narration for that?
no, Richard had that already.
Yep.
Richard had that competition all made. I just came into that piece as a narrator.
Yes.
So, but
Understood.
from that piece, then this other stuff that we do evolved,
Mhm.
the way we work.
And then, so it's a very fine line between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation,
Mhm.
and being involved with these sorts of fusion projects for you both.
Yeah,
It brings up this question, right? So, John, what is really important to you, for non-Indigenous people to keep in mind when working with Indigenous elders like yourself, and sacred stories, really, setting them to music or otherwise?
yeah. Well, one of the things because I grew up with a depth of my culture, I know what belongs to us and what they call an intelligent copyright, and I also know what's open, eh? And I always tell people if it's on Google, it's public knowledge. So I encourage people to whatever they see on Google, it's out there. People know all about it. So in that sense, there's no infringement of an intellectual copyright. I do participate in ceremonies that are sacred. People are invited to attend in person and not record, but just to participate in the spiritual well-being of whatever ceremony it is. But with Richard, I know what we can say to the general public, when we're sharing knowledge. And that's part of our creative process. We go through, like with spring. Uh, I grew up in Georgian Bay, and a lot of spring is about, I mentioned the coastline and traveling. That was hard. The Ojibwe people there, we'd move inland in the winter near Port Carling, Ontario, and then migrate back out towards the coastline, the 30,000 islands in the summertime. So some of that's in spring in Ziigwan, eh? So, but a lot of that comes from where I come locally. But a lot of the principles and what we do over the year, those are common knowledge about how we harvest, how we manage our nutrition over the course of a whole year.
And Richard, what have you found, over the years working with the Indigenous community in multiple projects? What approach and respect do you bring to your interactions? Like, what has worked for you? What have you discovered?
Yeah, it's been a voyage of discovery for sure. I was just to go back to talk about Nanabush and the giant beaver for a moment. My first sort of connection to this, or one of the roads into it, was we had a very prominent elder from in the Owen Sound community, which is where I currently live, near Owen Sound. His name was Basil Johnston. And Basil Johnston was very prominent because he had translated a lot of Ojibwe mythologies. Now, Basil Johnston, at the time when I met him, I talked to him on the telephone. He was very antagonistic towards non-native people, although John Rice has now pointed out to me it wasn't just non-native people, it was actually everyone. So that made me feel better. But basically, when I spoke to him, he basically said, well, you know, I've already written all these books. They're in the library. Go read them. So I went to the local Owen Sound Library and found like a huge resource of all of these books and containing all of these stories. And Nanabush and the Giant Beaver was one of them. So it was actually a published like account that I used in the first version of Nanabush and the Giant Beaver. And then it was, I think, on the third performance that we did in Parry Sound with John Rice. So when I connected with John, basically because he is from that specific area, this really was his own culture to disseminate. So then we started modifying the story a bit, and he would choose his own words and made it like sort of his own. So the story has actually evolved a little bit. So it's been a collaborative, enterprise, I guess. Like it's not static like that. And every time he tells it slightly differently. So yeah, I think does that answer your question?
Yes.
It's sort of describes sort of where this came from in the first place. In terms of I've worked with numerous different mentors. Most recently, I've discovered this wonderful mentor in John Rice, who's constantly kind of teaching me, and I've learned a tremendous amount about this. Initially when I got into the topic of writing native pieces, I didn't want to do it because I'm not native, and who am I to be doing this? But the Georgian Bay Symphony that I was involved with, they were like insistent that I did it. So I said, okay, well, I'll do it, but I need to learn first. So I started studying, and I mentored with an elder who was a drum keeper at the local Mowikwadong. It's called Native Cultural Resource Center. And, gradually began some confidence in terms of my understanding of their perspective on things. And I've always sought to, even from the beginning when I really didn't know anything, sought to try and be as authentic as possible, and not just to write some piece that is, I'm going to staple some title onto it, but the piece has nothing to do with Native culture. So it's been a life-changing experience, frankly. And I feel as we were saying earlier, I'm originally from England, so I'm an immigrant to this country. And at this point, I feel like I may have been like an Ojibwa in a past life or something, because like I feel like this is really the real Canada, and the sort of European culture that we've imported here, or this now world culture. All the cultures of the world live in Canada, which is a wonderful thing. I think that's one of the better aspects of Canada, this multiculturalism. But the home base is First Nations culture. And, I feel like it's part of my life's work, in a way, to celebrate this culture and to also like bring the message of the ancient Ojibwa to the world, because every country in the world has its own indigenous cultures, and all of these indigenous cultures have really powerful lessons and messages for everybody else. And so it's important in Canada that we recognize our own indigenous culture, and that what I hope to do with all of these works that I've created is to create a body of work which internationally will recognize these indigenous roots.
So John, the story of Zigwan is the story of spring. Yeah. And did the story exist in print before you worked with Richard on creating this new piece, or is it an oral tradition? Can you explain a little bit about how the story exists?
Yeah, it doesn't exist in print. You might read about, spring breakup and what happens like that stuff, but actually what our people did coming out of winter time into springtime, about, how winter was harsh and, we leave winter behind, we move into a time of regeneration and rebirth. That aspect actually comes from our teachings, and it's kind of like encourages us to, begin this new year process, of regeneration and birth. So a lot of that comes from our teachings, but in terms mostly of just common conversation we would have as of people as we would prepare to do springtime, getting ready for harvesting and over the summer of working hard. So it mostly an oral tradition. It does come from some of our teachings that we get, but a lot of it is a practical application that we talk about as we're getting ready for the winter. So that's what we share in the piece.
And the story is tremendous as a story, but it's informative as a means for survival, right?
Yeah.
Spring is great and it's pretty and there's robins and stuff, but like this is about survival, and so that really strongly for me comes through. Talk a little bit about the sugaring grounds, for instance.
Yeah, that's a beautiful aspect, because actually in a lot of places maple sap is the first medicine, eh? Back in the day when we would have a harsh winter, we'd run out of food and we'd go through a starvation time, maybe near the end of March, eh? We would go without food. We say that our blood becomes thick. So when we have the maple sap, drinking that sap thins our blood. That's the very first medicine we take to get us out of that harshness of winter, prepare our bodies for the upcoming harvesting season. So maple sap is that a lot of families had sugaring grounds that they would go to, and they would harvest the sap. They would boil it down to, maple sugar ultimately that we would carry with us all winter, all summer, all year long. But we would also make maple syrup, and then we mentioned in there we make candy on the snow too for the kids. Principally what you would see if you go to a modern sugar bush. That's what our people did before contact. But it is the harvesting of the first medicine that prepares our body and helps us recover from the winter time where our blood gets thicker. So that's an integral part of our yearly development as people in terms of our first nutrition.
And in the narration that you're using for Zigwan, are there traditional words, are there Ojibwe words within it, or is it mostly in English, words in the storyline?
We use Ojibwe to talk about specific things that are mentioned in the conversation, so that people can hear the word, and then we relay that in English. So that ultimately what we're trying to do, we're doing some, that's what's beautiful about Richard is doing, is that, we want Ojibwe in the piece so people can hear the actual word. Just like we listen to the music, we get to hear the Ojibwe word too.
And that's part of sharing that culture, right? And sharing an understanding. And this is great. And so Richard, it's very fertile material to write music for, right?
Very inspiring.
Tell me, we've only got a couple minutes left, but how did you make this into a viola concerto?
Well, I mean, it should be mentioned, the reason why it's a viola concerto as opposed to any other instrument is because of the great soloist Rivka Golani, who I've known for almost 30 years. And when you guys approached me about this piece and you wanted a soloist, she was the first one that came to mind, because in recent years, even though I've known Rivka a long time, in recent years, she's become obsessed with First Nations culture. And she has a powerful connection to the Blackfoot Confederacy in southern Alberta. And in 2016, she was honored with a spirit name. And in England, I was actually present at the time. It was a very powerful moment. And so she and I have this real connection over the First Nations people. Now, Rivka is Israeli, and she is Jewish. And so she kind of identifies with this group of people that have been kind of marginalized and, the victims of genocide and so forth. And so she really relates to the First Nations people of Canada and talks very passionately about what she calls the American genocide. And so she was the obvious person. She's this brilliant instrumentalist. And so that was the reason why it was a viola concerto, was because of Rivka. And, eventually Rivka, this is a really cool thing, like John says, about things converging and coming full circle. We're going to present Zigwan in London, Ontario, but Rivka lives in London, England. And she has already told me she wants to play Zigwan in London, England at the proms at Royal Albert Hall. And that's where John Rice played years earlier at the Royal Albert Hall. So I remember at a certain point, I was telling John, I was like, guess what? I just got off the phone with Rivka and she wants to do Zigwan in the Royal Albert Hall. And I was trying to explain to John what the significance was. And then he goes, yeah, I've been there.
That's
played
awesome.
in the Royal Albert Hall.
I love that. Very serendipitous. And for this world premiere of Zigwan, we're delighted to have Sharon Wei.
Yes.
And she's going to do an amazing job. She's really one of Canada's most incredible violists. And I've spoken to her many times, and she's very, very excited about performing this work. I'm excited about putting it together later this week. And, just in closing, maybe one thing, let's just talk about the last movement, the mosquito and the mosquito dance. This is such a joyous way to end. Tell me a little bit about this. How about John? Just a little bit about the story.
Yeah, it's just like, we talk about medicines, the sap is the first medicine. We actually, because there's everything that we live in creation, there's a symbiotic relationship with everything, eh? Even the mosquito. When the mosquito comes, he puts a little bit of spit in you, eh? And that little bit of spit thins your blood too. So we also have that same relationship like we have the sap, eh? That when he comes and he gives us a little gift, it thins our blood from the starvation time of the winter too, eh? But we also say we wouldn't let them all just have at us, eh? Eh? Don't let them all bite you and give you too much medicine, eh? You don't want that because they're still a bit of a nuisance, eh? Yeah.
And then Richard, so you brought that to the viola concerto aspect of this, and what did you create?
Well, yeah, it was almost like the piece kind of generated itself. And as I thought about it more, I kind of, there's this aspect, as you say, it's like a fun conclusion. I almost feel like it kind of morphed into a kind of like cartoon music, right? And, this aspect of like making the mosquito dance, and we've all been in the forest in June when there's too many mosquitoes, and you're kind of doing a bit of a dance because you're getting eaten by 100,000 mosquitoes. So there was something comic about that, I feel. And so what this has morphed into is kind of a spoof on the flight of the bumblebee of Rimsky-Korsakov. And I think, the violists of the world will maybe love me, but also hate me forever because I've written the most difficult thing. It's more difficult than The Flight of the Bumblebee. It makes that like a piece of cake by comparison. And, I just want to quickly say before I don't have another opportunity, I'm delighted that Sharon Wei is playing because I love Sharon. I know her very well. I've worked with her before quite a lot, and she's like a sister to me. So this is wonderful. I was talking to her the other day, and she's a mentor for many young violists at Western University, as many people know. And she was saying that her students have been complaining to her about having to play all these scales. And she says, oh yeah, look at this. Look at this mosquito dance. You gonna complain? This is what I have to play. So we're all really looking forward to hearing Sharon play 100,000 notes. It's what a conclusion to this big piece. It's a long concerto. There's 9 movements. It's a big story to tell, and it's a lot of sort of exciting twists and turns in the way things go, but it ends with a lot of fun.
Terrific. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, John, for joining me today for this interview. And I'm really looking forward to the concert.
Yes, me too.
So we've been talking about Zigwan, which will receive its world premiere as part of our concert, The Rite of Spring, on April 9th. This will be performed live from Metropolitan United Church in London, and it will be for an in-person audience, hooray, as well as live streamed and on demand. So thanks for joining us.
Okay,
Thank you.
Andrew.